Gary Graff is an American music journalist and an author right here in Detroit, reporting for a variety of local and national print, online, and radio outlets. And now he has a new book out all about music. And Chris, you're with Gary right now.
I sure am. The wealth of knowledge this man has. 501 essential albums of the 1990s. He broke down the 90s for us. Thanks for being here, Gary.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You know, it must be such an interesting decade to write about. You have, you know, the hair bands still. You had the older bands from the 60s and 70s. You had new bands emerging like Pearl Jam and Nirvana. How did you bridge that gap from the old school to the new school?
I mean, it is the last golden decade of the album, when we really listened to and consumed albums as albums. And then you had that fascinating evolution of every genre in the world happen. Country got big again, you know, and they had a whole new wave. We had West Coast hip hop, and then the East Coast hip hop answered that. And electronic dance music, gospel. So we made a big long list. You know, 501 sounds like a lot when you first say it, and then when you've made the long list of 2,300 that you have to knock this down to, it's not such a big number anymore.
Yeah, not such a big number. I know, I said when I started 501, I was like, did you do every album from the 90s? And you think about it, you're like, oh, there's a lot of releases there, obviously. Let's talk about Detroit in particular. Dominated the 60s in the music scene, had a good run in the 70s, you know, with Seeger and the Motor City Madman. What were the 90s like locally here?
So we actually saw a renaissance towards the end of the 90s. You had Kid Rock and Eminem with multi-platinum albums, really, as Kid Rock sang, putting Detroit back on the map. But you had a great underground going on even before then. We have a band called Big Chief in the book, and one of their albums, and you had a lot of that going on. But it really was a decade where things were developing, and finally, you know, got over the top with that pair of albums at the end of the decade.
So now 501, is there any order to the albums? Do you count them down, or are they just kind of in random order?
We didn't want to do that to ourselves, so we did it annually. And they're not even necessarily in alphabetical order, they're mostly, but we picked each year has a certain number of albums. It's not 100 albums per year. Some years were better than others.
That probably kept you sane, though, doing it that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Now, talk a little bit about what you want people to take from this book. I mean, just thinking of all the bands from the 90s, it's a great trip down memory lane for me.
And I hope that people look at it and say, wow, there was such a great degree of variety to that decade. There was so much music, and there were so many new things that happened. There was so much new technology that happened that brought music to us, the way we consume music up to the end of the decade, and why I call this the last golden decade of the album. As we got to the end of the decade, we were into Napster and file sharing and P2P technologies, and into the streaming world that we know it now, when we don't listen to or buy albums or consume music by album anymore.
That's right. It's so easy just to listen to that favorite song of yours over and over and over. Hey, you have so many years of rock knowledge and whatnot, been to so many concerts.
Not too many.
Yeah, give us a little backstage story of somebody who might appear in this book.
Well, one of my favorites was, we have several Nirvana albums, as you'd expect. So in Utero, during that tour, I did an interview with Dave Grohl, telephone interview, or so I thought. I get a call the next day from their publicist saying, that wasn't Dave.
What?
And it was Bobcat Goldthwait,
really?
If you remember him,
Yes.
who was a friend of Dave's. And they were a little, you know, their relationships with press weren't the great, so they decided to pimp somebody.
That is hilarious.
And so, so I had to go back and rewrite the story. But, you know, we laughed about it.
Yeah, Bobcat Goldthwait, another name from the 90s. That's all fitting, very much so.
And I pulled a couple
books.
pranks when they were in town that weekend.
Nice, you got them back a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit.
All right, Gary, somebody wants to get this book. How do they go about doing it?
Anywhere books are sold, physically. Of course, we always promote our independent booksellers. Online, out of the trunk of my car, if you see me.
All right. Well, hey, that's easy to get then. Gary, thanks a lot for coming by. Really appreciate that. I know Sandra in the 90s was big on New Kids on the Block. I don't know what they showed up in here.
They actually are. And they'll be in the 80s book as well.
NKOTB forever. All right. Thank you so much, you guys.
She's dancing over there.